My husband left me for my cousin, claiming she was a more attractive and intelligent woman than me. But after marrying her, she revealed that she had not always been a woman. How do you deal with doubts in your marriage when you know your husband hasn't done anything wrong, but you have that sinking feeling in your stomach that something is going on? I'm not the kind of person who makes baseless accusations, and I love my husband. I love Ben more than anything. When I married him, when we were both 23, I truly believed I had found my soulmate. We met in college, and yes, we were young, but I knew the moment we started dating that he was the man I would grow old with. I was certain that as time passed, we would only grow closer. We dated for 3 years, and that belief held true. Ben was everything I had ever imagined in a man, everything a partner should be. He was loving, trustworthy, attentive in a way I had never experienced before. Above all, I felt safe with Ben in a way I had never felt with anyone else. Like no matter what happened, no matter what life threw at us, we would be okay because we would face it together. It didn't take me long to decide that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. And after our wedding, I was happier than ever. I'm one of those sappy, love-struck people who enjoy every moment of married life. We weren't rich or glamorous. We had a simple wedding and lived a simple life. But we had each other and were building a life we could be proud of. I never doubted that belief, until recently. You can call it the end of the honeymoon phase or whatever. Every self-help book or advice column has a different name for it. But it wasn't that. It wasn't a honeymoon phase. Everything started after a family retreat with my extended family, my parents, my siblings, all my cousins, my aunts, uncles, and even my grandmother. The entire chaotic clan decided it had been too long since we were all in the same place at the same time. So we picked a long weekend, booked a cabin in the mountains, and spent time together. Ben was excited to come. Before the retreat, he hadn't spent much time with my extended family, but he had always been charming to an extreme and great with people, as I assume all former frat boys are. So I thought he would fit right in. Unfortunately, the retreat wasn't exactly what I would call a bonding experience for us. My grandmother had recently taken a bad fall and really needed extra care over the weekend. Since it wouldn't have been fair to burden her children, who were already dealing with their own health issues, I took charge. Because I'm one of the few relatives who lives close enough to visit her regularly, she was more comfortable with me, and I just assumed the role of caregiver for the weekend. That meant I spent most of the retreat with her, making sure she was comfortable, had everything she needed, and accompanying her when the noise from the rest of the family became too much for her. We're a loud and boisterous group when we're all together, and while she loves us, she no longer has the energy to be in the middle of it all for hours like she used to. I tried to involve Ben as much as I could, but he just didn't seem very interested. Not that I really blamed him. I mean, I love my grandmother with all my heart, but even I could admit that sitting quietly away from the rest of the family wasn't exactly the exciting weekend getaway I had promised, right? I saw him sitting off to the side with his phone or chatting with my cousins, which, in a way, relieved me a little. I have a few cousins who are so cheerful and fun that they can engage anyone in conversation. I'm a bit quieter, reserved, and serene, while Ben is very outgoing, so it was natural for him to mingle with the others who were more like him. He didn't complain even once about me being busy with Grandma, which I appreciated so much, and he kept himself perfectly entertained despite being surrounded by practically strangers. I didn't think anything was wrong until afterward. When we got back, things started to change. It wasn't like a switch flipped and I suddenly didn't recognize him. He was still my Ben. It's just that little things started to add up. He began working late some nights, a few times a week, and the hours he got home kept getting later and later. He told me work was getting more complicated and that it was normal for this time of year apparently. But it didn't make any sense to me at all. I mean, he'd been at the same company for 2 years and this was the first time I'd heard anything about working extra hours. Even so, I trusted my husband and didn't want to jump to conclusions. I tried to be understanding. I kept dinner warm for him and made sure his pajamas were ready, little things like that to make his life easier. Then I noticed he put a password on his phone. Ben had never, and I mean never, had a password on his phone before. He always said it would take too long to type in a password, and he read somewhere on the internet that the police could get your fingerprint off your phone. So he refused to use fingerprint or facial recognition or anything like that. I don't usually snoop on his phone, but sometimes, if it was nearby, I'd unlock it to check the time or take a quick photo of something, usually him sleeping in some funny position. I even had a habit of handing it to him to answer texts if he was busy. After the retreat, though, he kept it close all the time and wouldn't even leave the screen on if he put it on the table to eat or something. He kept it completely out of my sight. When I casually mentioned the password in conversation, he used the work excuse again, saying he had to add a password to sync his company email, which apparently he'd never needed to do before. Undoubtedly, the worst part is how distant he's become. He's always been affectionate and attentive, The kind of man who kissed me every morning before leaving and held my hand every chance he got. But now he barely touches me unless I initiate, even in the bedroom. It feels different somehow, like empty, I don't know. Like an obligation he had to fulfill before moving on to more important things. He was just going through the motions. I've tried so hard to rationalize his behavior. Maybe it was just work stress, building up over time, and it just happened to coincide with the retreat, where I essentially ignored him all weekend. But as the weeks went by, that feeling in my gut only grew worse. Something was happening, something worse. I'm not one to air personal problems, but I confided in one of my closest friends, Jessie. The first thing she said was that he was cheating on me. The moment she said it, it was like a punch in the gut. I wanted to argue, to defend my husband, but I couldn't. Everything added up, didn't it? I couldn't just ignore the signs. But I wasn't ready to believe it until I heard it from him directly. So I waited for him to come home and confronted him. I tried to stay calm and composed, but the moment I started speaking, he was already annoyed just by the sound of my voice. So I abandoned all my plans to approach it gently and just asked him directly. I asked if he was cheating on me. To say he was furious would be an understatement. I mean, he was livid, and he made that very clear. Probably the whole building heard him. At first, he couldn't believe I would ask him such a question, and when I explained why, he scolded me for imagining lies in my head while he was working himself to the bone to provide a good life for us. I don't know what I was thinking because when he explained it all, honestly, it was stupid. I mean, it was just work stress. He was working for us, for me. I felt so guilty, and I still do. I apologized immediately and profusely, but he was still so angry. I had taken years of trust and thrown it in his face at the first sign of trouble. What kind of wife does that make me? What kind of wife am I if I'm still doubting him now, even after he made it clear that everything he's done and is doing is for us, for me? I don't know how to stop feeling this way, but I don't want to risk losing my husband because I let my thoughts get in the way. Update 1. So listen to this. I wasn't crazy, overthinking things or being a bad wife, because it didn't take long for the truth to come out. A week after confronting him and being made to feel like a terrible person for doubting his honor, and a week of getting the silent treatment from him, I get a text from one of my friends. She was at a local club all the way across town from where Ben's office is, which is where he said he would be. If I had wanted to track him down to make sure he wasn't lying, I should have taken up her offer. My friend Danny sent me a long text basically saying she didn't know how to tell me this, but she'd just seen Ben at the club, and he was with another woman. My stomach dropped, and all I could think about was asking for proof. Even though I'd never doubt Danny, I had already confronted Ben, and he denied it, so I needed proof. The photo hurt in more ways than one. First, it was clear that he and the other woman were in the middle of a very passionate makeout session. They were practically on top of each other on the dance floor, near the bar where my friend was sitting. The second reason was, well, because I recognized the person he was kissing. Saya, my cousin. It was her hair and a dress I've seen a million times in her Instagram stories. It was unmistakably her. But still, I asked Danny for another photo just to be sure, and she sent me a video. And yes, it was her. There she was, my older cousin, clinging to my husband like he was her lifeline while they made out in the middle of the crowded club like they didn't have a care in the world. He was still wearing his wedding ring. Everything clicked at that moment, and it felt like my world was collapsing around me. Saya had been at the retreat, and I barely saw her because I was so busy taking care of Grandma. I mean, I knew she was there and had seen her with our other cousins, and obviously when Ben was with them, she was too. It wasn't a big cabin. It just never crossed my mind, not in my worst nightmares, that something like this could be happening behind my back. Yes, I suspected he was cheating on me, but I never thought he'd be capable of doing it with my cousin. I never thought either of them would be capable of it. Sure, Saya and I aren't the closest. We've had our differences, and I feel like sometimes she craves too much attention. Sometimes she takes all the air out of the room. But being someone who craves attention is worlds away from having an affair with my husband. And do you know what he said when he got home that night and I showed him the video of them? Not an apology, not an explanation. Just, yeah, you caught me. I'm with Saya now. This time, I was the one yelling. But I wasn't the only one because while he wasn't sorry, he was more than willing to blame me for his actions. Because you ignored me all weekend, and Saya was there, and I realized after just one weekend that I'm much more into her. She's more attractive and way more fun, and clearly, everyone else prefers her too. She's the clear winner, the family favorite. She's obviously the better choice, and I just wish I'd realized it before I married you. And then he left, throwing it in my face that he was going to her place and being with her like he always should have been. So here I am, writing all this, preparing for the inevitable step of divorce now. Update 2. Here I am with another update. When I got married, I thought it was the happiest day of my life, and that I was vowing myself to the man I'd spend the rest of my existence with. I even said my vows with all sincerity. Evidently, I was the only one who did. But even though I was already thinking of divorce after everything that happened, he went ahead and filed for divorce a week after leaving me, and he decided he'd be better off if our marriage ended as quickly as possible. We were married less than a year, and I'd already planned our first anniversary celebration, down to knowing what I'd wear to commemorate our love. He didn't even give me the chance to file for divorce first. This was the man I loved, the man who had promised to spend the rest of his life with me, telling me I was a second choice, that he only picked me because he hadn't been lucky enough to meet my cousin first. And you know what? He knows absolutely nothing about her. He can glance at her, spend one weekend with her, and decide she's the better, more attractive, more fun option. But I can guarantee he doesn't know the truth, because if he did, he'd have run away before the weekend retreat ended. Saya hasn't always been Saya. Before, she was Tony, if you catch my drift. She was born Tony, but one day my cousin Tony decided she wanted to be my cousin Saya, and so it was. Naturally, the whole family accepted her. We're not the kind of people to shun someone for being a little different. I want to make it clear now that this isn't an issue I have with Saya. This story has nothing to do with her transition. I have no problem with that. I just think she's a horrible person, and that has nothing to do with her gender. That said, Ben would feel differently. Ben comes from a small rural town that would be in the middle of nowhere if it weren't a couple of hours away from the city we live in. I'm talking about the kind of place where everyone knows each other. High school sweethearts get married, settle down, and their kids repeat the same cycle. A classic small-town mindset, and Ben's family's values align with that mentality. It's not like he's a hood-wearing supremacist or anything, but they hold very conservative and traditional views on topics like family roles and, general opinions about differences. Specifically, they strongly believe there are only two genders. Surprisingly, they're okay with same-sex marriages. One of his uncles is gay, I think. But beyond that, they're pretty traditional. Ben may live in the city now and might be a bit more progressive on some issues, but for the most part, he holds on to those beliefs. He would never have taken a second look at Saya if he knew the truth. Part of me wants to call him and tell him directly, letting him deal with the consequences, but I'm a better person than that, and I don't want the rest of my life defined by one foolish man. I've cried enough to realize it's time to get up and figure out how to move on, because he already has. The first step was signing the divorce papers. We were married for less than a year and had no shared assets, so it's a straightforward process. Now it's just waiting for the divorce to be finalized, and then I'll no longer be married. The next step is picking myself up again. Update 3. Forget taking the high road or being the better person or whatever nonsense I said in my last stupid post about Ben and Saya. To hell with all that, because that's where they belong. Yes, I said I was moving on and picking myself up, but that's a process, not a switch I can flip to suddenly decide I'm fine and healed, especially not in 4 damn months. That's how long it's been since I filed the divorce papers and Saya announced her relationship with Ben on her Instagram. Naturally, it showed up in my feed because, in all the chaos, I forgot I still followed her. The post that ended my marriage was a picture of them kissing, so I guess Saya decided to celebrate her newfound relationship by posting an official couple photo of them kissing. It was in a well-lit, clearly staged location on a hilltop. His arms were around her waist, and one of his hands was, on her cheek. He's no longer my husband since the divorce is finalized, but it still hurts. The wound was fresh, and they were pouring salt on it without a care in the world. I shouldn't have done it, but I messaged her. I called her horrible and asked how she could be such a harpy to her own family. I didn't really expect a response, and I don't even know what kind of response I would have expected anyway. What I got was a condescending paragraph telling me it would have been crueler for him to keep hiding it, and that I should actually consider it a good thing that I found out the way I did, because the truth is always a blessing no matter what. At that point, I was so furious that I didn't reply and just blocked them both everywhere. And I would have left it at that. Really, I would have. But guess what I got today? A wedding invitation. Yes, a wedding invitation for Ben and Saya's big day at his uncle's farm. My phone blew up with texts from my other cousins, telling me to check my mail because Ben and Saya were engaged and apparently going on about how they were extending an olive branch. Saya apparently wasn't interested in petty family feuds. She wants to be the mature one, right? Well, fine, she can be whatever she wants. I'm done. I don't want to take the high road. I don't want to turn the other cheek. I want them to feel worse than I've felt since he left me, not even 4 months ago, and he's already getting married. And I know exactly how to do it. After all, in Saya's words, the truth is always a blessing. Update 4. Since Ben and Saya are so in love and couldn't wait any longer, The wedding was set for a month after I received the invitation. It was a rushed affair, obviously nothing fancy, just like mine hadn't been. Except this time, instead of bothering with a church, they held it in Ben's uncle's backyard. Big yard? Sure, but I still don't feel guilty thinking it was tacky. I didn't attend the ceremony, of course. I wasn't about to endure the torture of watching them exchange the same vows Ben and I said barely a year ago. We should have been celebrating our first anniversary. Instead, he was at the altar with my cousin. I spent that day wallowing in self-pity, and I shouldn't have. I meant it when I said I was done being the nice one. I wasn't going to let that day pass without giving them my blessing, especially not after they sent me a personal invitation. That would have been rude, wouldn't it? So I showed up at the reception halfway through. The drinks were clearly flowing by then, but they hadn't cut the cake yet, so I wasn't too late. It was mostly his family there. My family, bless them, mostly decided that while they weren't going to reprimand Saya for this, they also weren't going to support what she did to me. I appreciated that, so most of my side of the family wasn't there to witness what happened next. When I walked straight up to Ben and Saya with a pink, blue, and white box in my hand, obviously a lot of his relatives recognized me. The room fell silent as conversations stopped, and everyone waited to see what was about to happen. In other situations, I would have felt uncomfortable or self-conscious with so many eyes on me, but not then, not there. I wanted them to watch and listen. By the way Saya and Ben reacted when they saw me, it was clear they didn't expect me to show up. Saya made it clear, but I told her I just wanted to give them my blessing and handed her the box. One of Ben's drunk great-aunts commented on how pretty the colors were, which gave me the chance to point out that they represented something. Although Saya clearly already understood, blue, pink, and white, the same colors as the flag hanging in her room, Ben just seemed confused. But Saya looked like she was about to faint, especially when I handed Ben the box and told him to open it. Inside, he pulled out one of those wedding cake toppers, but instead of a bride and groom, it was just two men hugging each other. At that point, I'm pretty sure Saya was completely frozen, but I just took the topper from Ben's hand, walked over to the cake, and placed it on top in the center. Ben went from confusion to anger and asked, "What kind of sick joke are you playing on us?" And then came the best part, the blessing. After all, the truth is always a blessing. The moment I told him the truth, Saya started sobbing, which was enough for Ben to start pleading with her to say I was lying. Of course she couldn't do that, but I was even surprised when Ben started crying too. I didn't stay long, nor did the rest of the family who attended. Apparently 2 uncles and their families were there and had no idea what was going on. They left as soon as they found out. It's a shame I'll never know what happened after I left, but honestly, I don't think I care. The truth is out there, and in a way, I feel like I got a form of justice. I'm not even that bothered by it. I just know this comment section will be full of people calling me all sorts of names or whatever. I didn't do it to embarrass her, I did it because they deserved it. Update 5. For those asking why Ben never realized what was happening right under his nose, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I haven't been in their intimate moments and clearly don't want to be. Saya has had her sex reassignment surgery, and I don't know how that works, but I suppose there are some signs of all this. Maybe they've always done it with the lights off, or maybe Ben is just too dumb to notice. As they say, love is blind, and that might be the case here. Maybe he never consummated the marriage, but I don't think that's the case. Although there's another possibility, maybe he always knew, and was just hoping no one would reveal it to his parents. Either way, what matters here is that Saya is still his wife. Yes, you read that right, she's still his wife. Because, listen to this. His family, those super traditional ones with outdated views on almost everything except same-sex marriage, don't believe in divorce. Exactly. It also turns out they're the ones who pay for Ben's apartment in the city and his massive tricked-out truck. So unless he's willing to give up those things, he'll have to follow their rules, no matter how archaic they are. Legally, he could probably get another annulment, since there are grounds for it. After all, Saya hid something very important from him. There are precedents where he could get an annulment without paying legal costs. Unfortunately for him, being single also means saying goodbye to his family and their money. Apparently, money and support are more important than, well, being happy. Honestly, his concept of marriage should have been clear by now, after everything he did to me. Speaking of that, part of the reason his family is pressuring him so much to stay married is because he was already on thin ice after the divorce with me. He barely avoided it not being technically a divorce the first time, especially since he quickly distracted them with a new shiny fiancée. But he won't get away with the same excuse twice. If he ends another marriage, he's out of the family. You know, if I thought what I did at the wedding was justice, this is karma biting where it hurts the most. According to one of my cousins, Ben's family is trying to get him and Saya to move back to their hometown so they can keep an eye on them. It's safe to say they're completely doomed to a miserable married life until death do them part. Update 6. For those who called my ex-husband brave for staying in that marriage, I think you should buy a new dictionary, because the definition of bravery I know is very different from that. First, because he only stayed in that marriage because he had no other choice. And second, because he's already escaped that marriage, just like he did with mine. And he's done it both figuratively and literally. He's filed for the annulment of the marriage, claiming that Saya had hidden things from him, but also because he literally escaped with his truck out of the city. However, his attempt at escaping lasted as long as his marriages, which, if you think about it, keep getting shorter. Will the third one last a few hours or maybe minutes? When he received the annulment papers, Saya went to Ben's parents to tell them what was going on. I know this because my ex-mother-in-law called me. Despite everything that's happened, I've never had a bad relationship with them. The one who does have a bad relationship with them is Saya. My father-in-law told her he would handle his son, but that the best thing she could do was sign those papers. Ben had already made the decision to not stay in the marriage, just like he wasn't going to keep the apartment or the truck, although the latter wasn't his choice but because his parents told him to return those things. The apartment was easy, they just stopped paying the rent. But the truck, not so much, because he took it with him. Even though they stopped paying for it, finding it will be a little more difficult. Saya protested before signing the annulment papers because she wanted to stay with the man of her dreams. But instead, my father-in-law told her to get her male rear end out of his house before she did anything she would regret. He told her he would never lay a hand on a woman, but in her case, he wouldn't have a problem because she isn't one. I know Saya's been crying with all the family, but not even the grandmother has wanted to see her to comfort her. And it's not because I'm her favorite granddaughter, it's because what she did is unforgivable. Destroying a marriage is bad enough, but doing it to your own family is 10 times worse. That's why I love my grandmother so much. She's a grounded person and always knows just what to say. Edit. They found my ex-husband. Or rather, they found his truck, because when they stopped paying for it, a debt collector took it. That's where my ex-husband had been sleeping, as they found his belongings inside. At least he has one last option, go back to Saya, who will be waiting for him with open arms.